ask her to pray from afar. Yeah. All right, any prayer updates or additions to the prayer list? A-Y.
Landsay.
Okay. Others?
Let's see. Who else? Well, Mr. Susan, just for tonight, Susan's got the flu, and Bryce was not feeling well, but I hadn't heard.
Did you put Dale Evans up?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get out, yeah.
I told him this morning, but I don't think he wrote him up there.
She said that, Kara said
Got
his
his son.
tongue was swelling.
I know
But they can't figure out what's
this
wrong
morning
with it.
whenever I went to speak to him,
Well,
I was
I'm
about
telling
to
you,
and
that's what I said,
I don't
they
have
took
to
him.
Miss Ann,
Because it's his art and that's
it's
his
his
sister.
sister.
Yeah, so
She
they
told me, she said, you need to check on your boyfriend, he's sick.
That night, I was at that, they took him for a while.
And she said, you need to check on your boyfriend, he's sick. And I looked at her, I said, well, I don't have my boyfriend's phone number. So she gave it to me, so I don't know what's wrong with him.
All right, others?
Kidney infection for like 6 weeks or something long time.
Mr. Dale?
That also. I'll be getting a new doctor.
Yeah, he's had it that long.
Y'all recording, you know that.
Huh?
Well, it's true.
Y'all recording, you know that.
I'm not gonna say the names, but let me just say he had the same doctor,
Yeah.
kidney doctor, Miss Joyce. We all know what that was.
You should, well, maybe a little bit off of this, but
They told me story, she knows about what she.
I figured I better say something because you know Gail.
they say what they're going to say anyway.
Oh, she got,
Okay, they can't, they can't, he said, they're waiting on the doctor to come.
Okay. All right, any others? All right, if not, Brother Tommy, I didn't get my Tommy Theus prayer today, so open us up.
Lord, thank you for the day that you've given us, and Lord God, just a beautiful day, and we praise you for it. We have a place to come and worship, and a place to come, Lord God, and realize that you're our only hope, and Lord God, we praise you for that. And we lift up all the prayer requests that we just mentioned to Brother Dale as he's having some health issues, Lord God, and I pray, Lord God, for Miss Kyla as they're trying to get you back into her. I think, have you just please help them and give the doctors wisdom as they continue to treat Brother Dale and continue to treat Miss Connie. And we lift up all the other prayer requests up so we can we hear Savior and praise you, Lord God, that you're the hope for America. And we pray for the leadership of America. And Lord God, just please protect them and keep them safe. And Lord God, just give us a good week. And Lord God, I pray that you bless every family here that's represented and the ones in the church. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. If this goes well, we'll get through most of chapter 2, but we'll see what happens. Just to kind of recap real quick, Ruth and Naomi have left Moab. Naomi's not too happy about Ruth being with her for whatever reason. And they are starting basically from rock bottom. As they go back to Bethlehem, Naomi sort of realizes the gravity of the situation, that she has got this Moabite woman in tow that is probably going to be more of a social liability than she is going to be any kind of help, at least in terms of family help and cultural rejection of Ruth and that sort of stuff. Remember again, Naomi's in this situation where she has got to find some family that will help her, some of her own family that will help her, be it a distant relative or a fairly close relative, doesn't particularly matter, but not just anybody's going to take Naomi in, much less Naomi and Ruth. So, I mean, some of this is self-serving. Some of it is recognizing that Ruth's going to have a hard row to hoe when she gets to Bethlehem. There's kind of problems abound with this. But more than that, remember that Ruth is also a living, breathing reminder of Naomi's sin in abandoning the promised land with Elimelech several years prior to that, because they had this, the grass is greener on the other side mentality. There's more barley in Moab, whatever bumper sticker we'd like to put on that. Not sure how people would respond if you had one that said there's more barley in Moab. That'd be kind of fun. And Ruth is also a reminder to Naomi that she married her sons off to foreign women as a result of her decision and Elimelech's decision to go to Moab. So, there's a lot of baggage sort of packed into Ruth's presence with Naomi. But nonetheless, here they come, the afflicted Jewess and her thoroughly non-kosher daughter-in-law, on the road to what looks like a really bleak future, which means family charity and whatever they can scrounge for themselves. But right at the end of chapter 1, we get a little glimmer of hope. Verse 22 ends with, they came to Bethlehem when there was a famine. And now Naomi and Ruth return at the beginning of barley harvest. So something has happened, something has changed, and there is now food in the field, so to speak. Here's our hint, though, that Naomi is not reading the events correctly. Remember, she's bitter. She tells these women, call me Mara, don't call me Naomi. I'm not pleasant anymore. I am bitter. I'm bitter about all of this stuff that has happened to me. I'm anything but grateful. At least Naomi's honest about her headspace. She knows where she is. Now, whether or not she thinks it's justified, I don't know, but she's at least honest about it. So what Naomi sees in the course of her life is this progression from fullness to emptiness, that God has judged her unfairly. He has taken things from her. She's probably not thinking this way, but Naomi's got the mindset that Job could have had, where, am I going to curse God and die, or am I going to praise him and wait on him to provide my needs? Job went toward praising him, and his wife says, why don't you just curse God and die? Job doesn't do that. Job waits. Naomi, on the other hand, bitter, says that she's bitter. So she sees this trajectory from fullness to emptiness, where when you look at the situation of the Jews, it goes the other way, right? They go from famine to the brink of a new harvest. So emptiness to fullness. And Naomi is converging with that new harvest in the promised land. So all of that introduction, let's read the first 7 verses of chapter 2. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young, continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So they have arrived in Bethlehem, and now they have the pressing issue of what are we going to eat? All right, beginning of barley harvest. That's a good sign for them, but still, we've got to get it from somewhere. All right. So the writer does 2 interesting things right here at the beginning. We want to read these things as connected, but actually they're 2 independent ideas. Naomi has a relative, or sort of a relative by marriage, in Boaz. But when Ruth specifically asking to go to Boaz's field, what Ruth is asking Naomi is, let me go into the fields of all of these men and see which one I might find favor, which one's eyes I might find favor in. This is not specifically about Boaz. The implication is probably that Naomi has not said anything about Boaz. Or if she has, they've been gone for so long, they don't know what land belongs to him. All right. Nonetheless, they're not destitute. Now, they're not in a good position, but they're not destitute. In the Mosaic Law, there was provision made for the poor through a kind of welfare to work system. They would not have had in ancient Israel, something we might think about in America, but they did not have a system where the poor were supposed to depend on handouts from the state. That's not how it worked for them. There were sort of two prongs to this. One prong is you have to work. The other prong is your family should help. And by family, of course, we mean covenant people. So y'all have heard me say that one of the worst things the church ever did was turn welfare over to the state. Here's your example. All right, Ruth is the example here. Poor people in the ancient world, particularly in ancient Israel, had the opportunity to glean the fields after the harvesters and to go around the edges. So Mosaic law actually required that farmers would leave the edges of their fields unharvested so that the poor could come in and harvest from the edges. Yes, that's cutting into the profit of the farmer, but it's not asking the farmer to pay more taxes or do something like that. What it's asking the farmer to do is make it available. And if you're willing to work for it, you can have it, kind of thing. So just to, this is directed to farmers. The harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest, and you shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of the vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. So who benefits from this? Poor folks and traveling folks. You're not looking for the IHOP exit if you're willing to go to the field and do some work, or you're willing to go to the vineyard and do some work. This is part of God's covenant with his people at Sinai. I mean, that's how old this provision is. And a little bit from the storyline, but maybe not. It reveals a belief in the dignity of work and self-support. And I say that just to say, as a culture, we've lost that. Work is a means to an end. There's nothing dignified about it. Self-support is a means to an end. It is not a dignified, what is the word that I want? It's not a, well, it's just, the only reason it's worth your time is so you don't starve, right? There's nothing inherently good about it necessarily. In the ancient world, work was good. And work was good because God worked. God worked for 6 days and rested on the seventh. If it was good enough for God, it's good enough for the Jews, right? Of course, we don't have a culture that puts God at the top, so naturally the rest doesn't follow. Gleaning the fields, as Leviticus talks about and as Ruth goes and offers to do, this is not easy work. This is hard work, this is hot work, and this is dangerous work. I mean, not every landowner is going to fulfill the requirements of the law. Thankfully, you're not going to get shot. They're going to have to get close to you, so you might have a chance at running. But you could be killed if the wrong man, if you were in the wrong man's field, or if the wrong workers were working for that man, and you show up unannounced, gleaning along the edges or going in behind them, they can turn around and kill you. I mean, this is a possibility. Now add to that Ruth is a foreign woman who's not supposed to be there. She's a Moabite, and you can tell the difference physically. They don't have to go ask her where are you from. They just know. So this is not the happy-go-lucky little job, right? This is, she's not, I hate the children's book pictures of this, where she's got her lovely little bag and she's going along and just sort of sweeping it up and putting it in. No, she's not. All right? If she's along the edges, she's having to cut it just like everybody else. And with what? I mean, there's problem one. She doesn't have any tools for this, so this is bare hand kind of work. If she's going along depending on the harvesters who are ahead of her. Some of them are not leaving much because they're careful with what they do so as to not cut into their master's profit. So there's not much to get. So, I mean, this is not like, she's not just finding big mounds of barley as she goes. What it also tells us, though, is that Ruth was serious when she told Naomi, I'm willing to go and I'm willing to sacrifice my life for you and your people and your God and all the rest of it. She is willing to make herself vulnerable for her sake and Naomi's. And whether or not she even really knows this is what she's doing, because she hasn't said much about it yet, she's stepping out in faith, believing that God is going to provide for her needs. And I notice that, again, the assumption is not that help is going to drop out of the sky. God has done that. Manna showed up. But that's not the assumption. As one commentator writes, faith doesn't simply sit around waiting for provision to drop down from heaven. We are called to do what we can, and as we do, to trust that God will provide for our needs. And so that's the predicament that Ruth is in. We have nothing to eat. Somebody's got to go do something. Let me go do it. Let me go glean the fields. Now, what is interesting about all of this is evidently Naomi does not. Or at least that's the implication of the way that it's written. Ruth goes. Ruth gleans the fields. Where's Naomi? In her late 50s, early 60s. So, and probably more efficient than one. But it seems like she just sort of lets Ruth go out there and handle all of this on her own. Her response when Ruth asks her to basically let her do that at the end of verse 2 is go. Now, this is, one, I say this with a caveat around it, parenthesis, whatever, but this is one problem with the Bible being written. No idea what the tone of that go was. Is she saying like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, go ahead? Or is she going, all right, go. Don't matter to me if you live or die. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could read that go. But what she doesn't say, and I think that's where the real truth of it is, she doesn't say, you go and I'll help. Or she doesn't say, let's go together. She tells Ruth, fine, go. It could also be, I don't want to be unfair to Naomi, but she's shown herself to be bitter, but it could also be relief that she doesn't have to. That Ruth is with her, and maybe she's beginning to connect the dots and see, okay, Ruth is with me, Ruth is willing to go do that. I am 60 whatever years old or 50 whatever years old. It wouldn't be the best thing in the world for me to do this, so I'm grateful that she can. And she doesn't say thank you, but again, who knows?
She may have been doing other jobs.
Maybe, we don't know. And, one of the deals is this is Ruth's book. It's her name.
And she says that you go, my daughter.
Right.
That's, to me, sounds kind of sweet.
Well,
It's an endearment.
Yeah.
I don't know. She calls them both her daughter, Orpah and Ruth, my daughters at the beginning, and it's clear that she doesn't really want them to go.
Yeah.
So it could, I don't know. I mean, there's...
Well, there's other stuff to do besides gleaning. She could have been doing something else. The Bible just doesn't tell us that. There's always plenty for somebody to be doing.
Yeah. My own thought on Naomi, based on what Naomi has said about herself, is she's too consumed about worrying and doesn't have... I agree with it. That's just my take. And I won't preach the sermon. I'll keep going. Because there is, in any case, a God-fearing landowner in Bethlehem who cared for the poor. And it's Boaz, who, as it happens, is also Naomi's distant relative. Gee, what a coincidence. Not really. All right, so now verse 3. What I mentioned earlier, there's no rhyme or reason to what Ruth goes out and does. Ruth just says, let me go glean. It can be, Boaz's field. It can be Josiah's field. It could be Jedediah's field. It doesn't really matter. Just let me go out and glean. Because the Bible then tells us she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. The text there where we have it translated, she happened to come, literally translates to as chance chanced. Or as we would say, as luck would have it. I mean, it to her is totally at random. She just happens to show up. She doesn't have angelic visions directing her. They're not voices from heaven guiding her path. This is the result of Ruth trusting in the Lord and Him directing her steps to exactly the right location. Again, I'm not sure how conscious that Ruth is in terms of her decision to trust Naomi's God, but clearly He's using her willingness to be directed, at least, to provide for herself and Naomi. And so she's gone to the right field, and lo and behold, here comes Boaz. Now, there's something to mention here, which is the Bible tells us that Boaz was coming from Bethlehem, which means Boaz has been in the city. He's a man of some standing. When we think about this field business, he's not living in the farmhouse up the road. Boaz probably lives in the city, has considerable means, and has come to check on his field and to come to check on his workers. So when you have a kinsman like Boaz, he's got some money, he's got some connections, he's got the ability to take care of not just Naomi, but Ruth as well. And so we see that. Let's pick up there in verse 4. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So if you are a student of the Bible or a careful student of the Bible, you know that the first words that come out of somebody's mouth tell you a lot about their character. Happens to be true with people in real life too. And the first thing that Boaz does is he greets the reapers with a blessing. Go back and look at it. "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Sort of interesting. If you go to a Roman Catholic church or an Anglican church or an Episcopalian church or in some Methodist churches, and you're kind of more high churchy Presbyterians, lots of times when the pastor approaches the pulpit, he will say, "The Lord be with you." And there's some variation of a response from the congregation that is, "and also with you." This is Boaz. That's where we get that. It's from this interaction between Boaz and the workers in his field. Our narrator here is giving us an immediate clue that Boaz honors the Lord in his work and is respected by his workers. And we don't know how long the barley harvest has been going on. We don't know exactly, how long these guys have been working for Boaz, but it seems to me that all of this is happening pretty quickly. So these are guys who know Boaz already and have agreed to come work for him, probably because they respect him and they know what his priorities are. So he's there and he's looking around his fields, he's talking to his workers, and then all at once he notices Ruth over there, and he has no idea who she is. And I won't walk up to her and say, "Who are you?" He doesn't walk up to her and say, "What's your name?" He doesn't walk up to her and ask anything identifying. He says to the foreman, "Whose young woman is this?" Which is the same thing as asking, where does she fit in society? Clearly she's poor. So either she is somebody's servant or she's traveling and doesn't have means to provide for herself any other way. So he asks, "Whose young woman is she?" Again, same thing, where does she fit in society? And so the foreman says, "Well, she's that foreign woman from Moab who came back with Naomi," which is about the same thing as saying, well, she's foreign and she doesn't really belong anywhere, but she's a hard worker. She's been out here all day with the exception of a short break. Now, that report from the foreman theoretically could have gotten her a job. I mean, that sort of, again, this is equal opportunity employment here. Men and women alike could be harvesters. So that could have gotten her a job. That's not the direction Boaz goes. He turns his attention to Ruth, and the first thing that he does is he addresses her as a person. He says, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner? By the way, she recognizes her own predicament. We don't want to mistakenly say that Ruth is aloof about all of this. She gets it. But Boaz answered her, All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and for a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Somebody get Boaz a pulpit and a pay raise. All right. Imagine how Ruth must have felt. First off, he calls her my daughter. Coming from Naomi, that's her daughter-in-law. So it might be expected that that title would be given from Naomi. But coming from Boaz, a Jewish man who has no clue about her other than he knows the stuff about Naomi. There comes the help in time of trouble. But he doesn't know anything about Ruth, and yet he's willing to say, I don't have it up there. I was about to dramatically point without it. Listen, my daughter. And begins immediately to tell her how he will take care of her. He's giving her a place to belong as part of his family. Now, these are likely the first kind words that Ruth has heard since she got back. Chances are highly likely that everybody else, the whispers in the vineyard, so to speak, are, y'all know about that Moabite woman that came over here with Naomi? What in the world's up with that? Why's she here? Don't she know she don't have no place here? I mean, you can imagine, like, this is the church gossip clique after some random person in the community who may have a less than stellar reputation shows up to church on Sunday morning. Same idea. But here comes Boaz. Boaz says, hey, you got a place here. I'll take care of you. And more than that, I want God to take care of you. I'm going to pray for God's blessings on you as though you are a part of our covenant community. As though you're already in. Now, has Ruth done a daggum thing to establish herself as a Jewish woman? Or a daggum thing to establish herself as a person who worships Yahweh? Not to the culture. But you know what it's about. Even here, it's about the heart. Yes, ancient Judaism is a highly ceremonial religion. It's a highly liturgical culture. And yes, there are laws and ways you're supposed to live and all of that. But Boaz looks at Ruth and he recognizes that she's got it figured out. And if the people had been like Ruth, they might not have been in a famine. But they didn't. And what does he do? He prays God's blessings on her. He recognizes the sincerity of Ruth's words to Naomi when they left Moab. He recognizes her sacrifice. So he prays that the Lord will grant her the protection that she's looking for. And Ruth recognizes the gravity of the whole thing. Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner? That's a loaded statement. It's not just, why are you taking pity on me? It's, why are you risking your reputation by associating with me? Okay, if you're not thinking of the woman at the well or Mary Magdalene, it's about time you start. Jesus' reputation could have been, and largely was, ruined by the company he kept. Boaz's reputation could have been ruined by the company that he kept, particularly in this case when he welcomes her into his home, which is effectively what he's done by calling her his daughter. This is a woman who was a non-entity or worse in the eyes of everybody else. But she somehow merited favor in the eyes of this man who has some standing in the community. Again, he comes out of Bethlehem, which tells us he does his business dealings and probably lives in the city and has fields and land and all the rest of it. So she's found favor with him. I don't don't know if we quite get that because we don't live in this kind of a culture, so it's really hard to think about what that would look like now. But at the end of the day, this is also demonstrative of going the extra mile. You don't.
We experienced some of that in Germany.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
I could walk from our apartment into base, good morning, good evening, how do you do? Everybody I passed would speak. If I was with Rick, he's GI.
Mm-hmm.
And there, would not look at you, would
Yeah.
not speak.
Yep. There you go. There you go.
And that wasn't Moabite.
Right. Right. You were the good guys. Right. Right. So it isn't just the words that Boaz offers, right? It's the way that he treats her. It's the place that he gives to her. She eats with his people. I don't know if, well, we haven't gotten to that yet, but let's go ahead and look here and then we'll say some of that. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men. I love this. Let her glean even among the sheaves and do not reproach her. So let her go where she wants to. Let her get what she wants. And also, pull out some from the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean and do not rebuke her. AKA, don't make her work too hard. Yes, let her work, but give her some that she doesn't have to deal with by hand, that she can just pick up and go. Now the children's book coloring pages are accurate. Okay. Leave it for her to glean and do not rebuke her. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley, or an ephah, depending who says it. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. So, I mean, here we go again. Drink with my people, eat with my people. Sure, you can work in my fields. My young men aren't going to mess with you, but they will get you water and that sort of stuff. And then to the young men, which presumably, maybe Ruth doesn't know about this and he's just taking care of her. Maybe she does, we don't know. But to those workers, y'all take care of her too. It's not just Boaz taking care of her, it's the whole operation is taking care of Ruth. It's, again, hard for us to think about, especially when we've had something like First Sunday Fellowship. What is it like to starve and also be trying to work to get the food that you need so that you can go to work again tomorrow to try to get food? And I mean, this is an existence where you live not paycheck to paycheck, but sheave to sheave, basically.
Hand to mouth.
All right, hand to mouth, that works. So the idea that she was full and then had some left over to take home is unthinkable. And remember, she shouldn't belong here. Now, I'm just going to, this is not here again, but I'm going to throw it out there. How would we react if we were the Jews and we watched a Moabite woman walking away with the whole kahuna and we'd been working our tails off all day and nobody did that for us? We're not going to see the good in that. We're going to immediately go, okay, wait a minute, this is not fair.
Where's mine?
Yeah, where is mine? She's not even from here.
Be picking into that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, now she has somewhere to belong. She doesn't need the approval of anybody else. She's got Boaz. And Boaz is all she needs in that moment. So she has this abundance that she carries with her. When we get to Naomi, Naomi says to her, and again, this is not so obvious in English, but if you're looking at it in the Hebrew, it is. Naomi is real shocked, like floored. Where in the world did you glean today? Where'd you get all that? Where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Now again, Naomi still ain't got it figured out. She's still not saying, bless you for going to work. Thank you for bringing this home. She's going, who is the guy?
I know, that wasn't nice.
Yeah. This is really irreverent, but sometimes I want to read that and think of Naomi going like, okay, who's your sugar daddy? You know, because that's what it sounds like. I'm going to get canceled from Southern Baptist something now. Sorry, Miss Connie. But I mean, it is. It's like, it's not got, for Naomi, it has nothing to do with how hard Ruth was working, even though if you go back in the text and you look at it, the thing that set her apart in the eyes of the foreman was, she's this foreign woman, but golly, she works hard. So she's floored, and it tells us that she brought home a whole ephah, however you want to say it, which is somewhere between 29 and 50 pounds of grain, which is, I had to ask because I don't know things, so I had to ask Wikipedia over there. But that's something like a big bag of deer corn. All right, so this is what she's bringing home. Yeah, and this is what she brought home every day. To Mom's credit, she had the idea. I just didn't know. So I asked. But yeah, I mean, this is a lot, and it's coming home every day like this. Again, I say, watching Ruth tote that big old bag of barley to the house would be a hard pill to swallow for some. So.
We don't know what she looked like, though. She might have been,
She might have been an Amazon woman. Who knows?
She could have been.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The assumption about, and I don't know because I don't know, but we have no pictures, believe it or not, but the assumption about the pagan women, including the Moabite women and the Ammonite women, is that they're beautiful. Whatever standards of beauty were in the ancient world, Ruth, kind of checks the top box there. So, moving on.
We're a lot stronger right then.
Oh yeah. And that's why I'm not scared to question where Naomi was when Ruth was out gleaning the fields, because even though she would have been probably 61, 62 when this is going on, she'd have been in pretty good shape to have worked a little bit. I'm not saying she could have been out there like Ruth was, but yeah. And she was willing to go it alone, which means she wasn't worried about her own ability to get there, or she hoped, yeah. But anyway, so Ruth tells her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. So again, if you were questioning it, Ruth didn't intend to necessarily be in Boaz's field. That's just how it happened. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. So again, you want to know about some of the dangers of this gleaning and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. All right, well, let's back up for just a minute. I don't have much time. We see Naomi's attitude begin to change. Her heart begins to soften toward God, and she cries out, the Lord bless him. Now, the NIV I like on this. The NIV says, the Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Some people, I don't have much question, but I'll throw it out there, question whether she's talking about the Lord or whether she's talking about Boaz in that last statement. Is she saying that Boaz's kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead, or is she saying that the Lord's kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead? Grammatically, we don't know. It could be either one. But from context, it seems to me that she's talking about Boaz. She's talking about the Lord. Because Boaz doesn't have anything to do with the dead, as near as we can tell. Right? Unless she's using that metaphorically, that they would have been dead were it not for Boaz's kindness. So, you can take it however you want to. I don't think it much matters, but I think either. Go ahead.
Maybe she was talking about Elimelech, since he was her kin.
Yeah, that's true.
And that would be the dead that she was speaking of.
That's true.
I don't know.
So there you go. You can have it either way. Any way you want it, that's the way you need it. So she says the man is a close, thank you. The man is, So the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. Now that's bringing in another Levitical issue, the kinsman redeemer, which we don't have time to talk about tonight, so we'll have to bring that up next week. But what Naomi is beginning to realize is all of this stuff is happening in this really helpful way, even though she doubted it. And she's beginning to realize, oh, God's not out to get me. He is actually taking care of us, or taking care of me. Again, you still don't see Naomi really, being grateful for Ruth. The closest you get is, again, practical Naomi. You can count on Naomi to be the most practical person in the Bible, I think. It is good that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. I mean, you see some, like middle-aged woman wisdom showing up here, in kind of a motherly way, not too much, but, you're bringing in the ephahs of barley. We don't want you to get hurt, so you stay with his women. Yeah. Yeah. So, again, is this care for Ruth? Is this care for Naomi and protecting Naomi's interest? I don't know. But she does seem to be catching a clue about the Lord at least. And Ruth does what she says. She kept close to the young women, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So next week, aren't y'all proud? We made it through a whole chapter in one night. We haven't done that ever. So we won't next week. We'll talk about the kinsman redeemer, and that'll stop us. But as we get going on this in chapter 3, that's where it's going to get weird.
I'm gonna miss you. You're gonna have to take it next week.
Yeah, Mom and Dad are going to be out of town. You won't be, so all right, we'll keep going. Yeah, we get the weird thing of laying at his feet, which will.
He also explained too, she saw him. He didn't hide.
Yeah.
He depended upon strangers.
Right. And, there's a particular instance in Mark's gospel where Jesus gets in trouble, and the disciples really get in trouble with the Pharisees because it's the Sabbath and they're gleaning along the path. And the Pharisees are like, how dare you do this? And Jesus then, hits them in the teeth with, yeah, but do you know about David and the bread of the presence? And, takes them on a whole church history lesson. So, all right, let me hush because we got 10 minutes. But questions, comments?